Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today is March 10, 2023. We want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast. I'm probably wrong about everything. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here today with Norman Maslov, better known as Mazzy. What a pleasure and an honor. Where in the heck you calling in from, Mazzy?
I live slightly north of San Francisco, my birthplace in Seattle, slightly north, 12 hours north of San Francisco.
First question
Yeah.
is, what is the best thing for a human being?
The best thing for a human being is just the world around us, the earth.
That's good. The world around us. I love it. What's your favorite form of information? How it comes into you?
Orally, listening. That's why I'm such a big music fan, and things changed for me when I really started getting into music. I mean, literally 9.5 years old. I can tell you the date. I've into music as a kid. We all are, but orally music, and then of course, I mean, if we're talking about news or reading and of the visual style, I like art of any kind, music
Yeah,
and artwork. So that's probably it
that's
for me.
good. Music and art, we're similar. And so, why do you think humans collect or gather information?
I think to move forward. I mean, it's
Yeah.
in a way, it's like that joke that Woody Allen says in Annie Hall. Like our relationship's like a shark. If a shark doesn't move forward, it dies. And what we have here is the dead shark. And so I think we always have to have some kind of stimulation. And probably as we get older, it's like if you have a Macintosh computer, the little ball spins around when the memory's low. I think we have a little bit of that. Certain things as we get older, it's harder to retain. Although I remember specific things 50 years ago, and of course, 2 weeks ago, maybe not. So moving forward is
Yeah,
always important.
I like that. And the ball in the Macintosh. I have a gerbil that gets tired. On the Anyways, do you think this need or want to collect information is more innate or more invented?
Obviously, I think it's innate, but that's just for me, and I can't speak for anything else. I mean, some people seem not to have a thirst for
Yeah,
new knowledge and learning new things, but I just soak it up
I agree.
personally. Yeah.
Beautiful. Do thoughts create emotions?
Oh, absolutely. But it goes the opposite way too. Emotions create thoughts and experiences. Well, and create artwork. But again, in music and physical artwork.
Yeah. Fill in the blank. I don't know what I think until I
No, it's happening.
nice. Yeah.
Am I going to
McLuhan.
get a graph after this? Great.
It's all about having fun and laughing. But McLuhan says, I don't know what I think until I say it. Joan Didion says, I don't know what I think until I write it.
And
So
going
I
back to an earlier question, Marshall McLuhan was in Annie Hall.
exactly. I was going to
I
tell you
have
this.
him right here, as a matter of fact. You know nothing about Marshall McLuhan and the media and culture.
Yeah, I was going to tell you at some point. Do you know that Woody flipped Marshall? Marshall would say the key line in those few lines Marshall says in Annie Hall as a question. Marshall would say it, you mean my whole fallacy is wrong? And Woody made him say it as a statement. So he exposed the world to Marshall
Nice.
backwards. But then there's another McLuhanism that applies. A half a truth is still a lot of a truth. So if you get McLuhan half right, you're still doing good, Woody.
Oh, exactly, exactly.
Can humans think without language?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I'm assuming so. I mean, of course they think. They just don't think in whether it's the English language or whatever the language they have. I mean, all humans have some sort of language, whether it's grunting, going back. But so absolutely. I mean, that would be
Yeah.
my opinion.
In fact, Chomsky says the language is not just words, it's a culture, a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. What do you do when language doesn't work? When language breaks down, what do you do?
I don't think language doesn't work. I think the interpretation of language doesn't work. I mean, especially we're in a time. I think this from my experience. This is the most frightening time we've been in a long time, because I think people are interpreting, factual things, and that's to me more dangerous about how the language is just the transport system of that, and that scares me more than anything else. I was young, young to remember, old enough to remember, the Cuban Missile Crisis, but I had no idea what it is. I was a young, what was that, 1960, whatever. So I was six
Yeah.
years old or something, 61. I didn't know what that was, but I remember it was, the duck and cover stuff and all that. But I didn't have the fear of what's going on now with communication and language and people interpreting things that are not factual. That scares me more.
Yeah. Well, no, I appreciate how you did that, because really it's me and you versus the question, more so the wording on my questions. Like, how can we suss this out? But I'm saying, when the interpretation of language breaks down, say you're talking to one of your peers in the photography business, and verbal language breaks down, what do you do? Or not even verbal, like you're typing an email or talking on the phone and it breaks down.
Well, I think it depends what the end need is. At some point, things break down, and you have to move on if the communication isn't there. Sometimes, if it's like, I am a photo agent, I've been a photo agent for 37 years on the commercial side, and I can't have those communications to break down, because we have to get there eventually. But in my case, I do the negotiations on the projects. Some of it is budgetary, some of it is getting promoting the artists I represent. Uh, they're the ones that have to interpret their vision of what the projects are more than I do. I'm the facilitator, a little
Yeah.
bit of the producer, so it is a little different for me.
Yeah.
So it doesn't, it can't break down there. Otherwise, it just moves on, and we don't work together,
Right.
unfortunately.
Your observations of humans in general, are we more thinking beings or more feeling beings?
I think both. I just think different people develop different aspects more than others, possibly. And I think it could also change within the same person at different times in their life, whether it's relationships, whether it's you know, physical love, friendship love. You go through that period, it's one thing, and then it's something else other times.
Yeah. Two questions from Alan Turing in the 50s. Is thinking a function of the soul?
I don't know.
It's good.
I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't
saying I don't
obviously
know.
haven't obviously a lot of these questions I haven't thought about, but I mean,
Yeah.
I believe in the soul, maybe not in what he's talking about or what you're asking about, but to me, there's a soul in everything, or the possibility of a soul in everything, whether it's music, and it's not necessarily just in black soul music. It can be in rock and roll, it can be in jazz, it can be in, indie, whatever. There's a soul there. There's a soul in artwork, and I feel, and I think I can perceive it pretty well. I can tell when something is soulful. Not that I don't like things that are not soulful in terms of art, whether it's television or cinema. Sometimes, is a Woody Allen movie more soulful than a Truffaut film, or whatever, things you can get, or a documentary. It depends in that moment. A soulful can be a comedy. It could just get to you in a different way. So
Yeah.
I mean, I could go on this kind of question. That's a interesting question, but well,
No, I
that's all I have to
appreciate
say.
I appreciate it because all the questions are just prompts, in fact. And I want you understood from the beginning. If you say I don't know, that's totally fine. You don't have to
Yeah,
feel like Rebecca Solnit said so well. Just because you ask me a question doesn't mean I have to answer it.
that's true.
You know,
That's true.
so it's just these are really prompts. But the second, and you anticipate a question coming up, but first to finish the Turing, the second Turing question is: can machines think?
Not in the same way we can, although more and more each day, I would say yes, in a different way, and it's getting a little, you know, science fiction films, and when I was a kid, I used to read a lot of science fiction, or
Yeah,
teenager even, a lot. Um,
yeah,
and I mean, a lot of these things are coming to reality in a way. And I was just playing around in the last few weeks with Chat GPT and AI and writing these things. And of course, there are prompts of things that are out there in the World Wide Web, whether it's Wikipedia and essays and what they're pulling from. I think some of it's superficial, the responses I get, but obviously it could be because of the prompts that I gave it. And so maybe they were superficial in the way
yeah.
it responded. But a
Very good. I was
lawnmower is
curious.
not but a lawnmower is not gonna think, and that's a machine. I think.
Um, I'm curious, reading science fiction growing up, did you ever read More Than Human by Theodore Sturgeon? You
No,
know
but I
that
did read a lot, a number of I didn't read that one. I've read a lot about Peter Sturgeon, books. I read a real cross section of things. I mean, there was maybe a 5-year period when I read a lot of those, and mostly that was junior high school through high school in that
yeah.
period.
Well, I'm always curious because wanting someone to break it down. That's Phil Lesh and Frank Zappa's favorite book,
Oh,
More
is
Than.
it?
Yeah. And it's a great title alone, More Than Human. So, Mazzy, do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
Happiness.
Yeah. Does the brain more detect consciousness or create it? Like, is consciousness there bubbling away and we're detecting it, or are we creating it?
I think both.
Yeah. What's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
But
Thought.
but it depends, and it
Yeah.
depends how deep you go. You know, I mean, thought to me is always there. My mind is taken away, not into the point where it keeps me up all night, but I I have more ideas than I have the time or the discipline to create something. I've said this many times when people have asked. I feel I'm an artist without a discipline. I work
Yeah.
as a facilitator. I have all these great ideas, and I don't have the discipline or the patience usually to create them. But I get a lot of good ideas. I've never failed to have ideas of things, and that's always I'm coming up with many ideas. I just can't put them to practice to create, at least on the physical form, whether it's in book form or painting or cinema or even photography, you know. But
Well, I
that's why
think,
in my case, my YouTube and my music, vinyl community, and that whole thing has been my creative outlet for the last 5 years, and especially all during the pandemic. I'm allowed to be a little theatrical, being a little over top, sharing in a way these stories of me growing up in San Francisco at the right time, right place, musically at least, and creatively. That has affected everything in my life, and it's why I am here now. Aside from leaving San Francisco and moving to Seattle 8 years ago.
yeah. Well, it's interesting because there's three things you evoked. One is that is your art form, is making your videos. It's a
Yeah,
great, you're doing great there. I love it. That's how we connected because I watched one. I goes, hey, I want to interview you. And there are no right or wrong answers to any of these questions, but that one you got right. Thought is faster than light.
now how
In my,
can you get? You can't get a question right if there are no right or wrong answers.
that's right. No, it's
So
a joke.
so you're wrong there, Gary.
Yeah, it's
Jerry.
like one of your heroes, Woody Allen. It's a joke, but anyways, we're going to talk about comedy too. But the other one is, where do you think no, is your always thinking kind of personage, who you are, the mazziness, is that more innate? No, is that more from the DNA or more the way you were raised that you're always thinking?
That's a very good question. The short answer is I have no idea.
Yeah.
I think it's the environment. I mean, my
Yeah.
parents weren't artistic. It turned out I was adopted, but the father who I got, Paul Maslov, when I was 7, was an amazing man, and he didn't fulfill the potential he wanted to in terms of he wanted to study architecture, and he had to come out of school because of work, because his parents and help his parents, and so he did other kind of normal, like middle class jobs, and same with my mother, and they weren't artistic. And I mean, for me, the being in San Francisco and in the Bay Area, being into baseball and little league as a kid, but all of a sudden that first Beatle concert changed everything and set like it was like a launching pad on
Yeah.
February 9th, 64, that changed me into this musical journey that I'm still in today, and I'm 68 now.
Yeah. So you mean that's the Ed Sullivan Feb 9 or the live show you saw? That's Ed Sullivan.
Ed Sullivan
Feb
show.
9 64, Ed Sullivan, because we're very, very similar. We're about one. What year are you born?
54.
Yeah, I was born in 53. We're really close.
Yeah, the year the 1954, the year Alan Freed coined the term rock and roll, the year of the Salk vaccine, and the year Leo Fender designed the Stratocaster guitar.
Oh, that is great, because
So that's a good year. And Elvis Presley's first record.
I've done that because I've done that with 53. It's when, anyways, I go on and on, but it's very similar. I've picked out these key major points that what happened. So the poet Audre Lorde said, you can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools. Yvonne Rainer responded and said, you can if you expose the tools. What new tool do you suggest?
I want things that you can assemble or disassemble without tools. So
yeah,
how you get something from, maybe, I don't know, some people dislike IKEA because they feel it's disposable, but a lot of times all the tools are there you need.
Yeah. What new toy do you suggest?
I know you said don't think it over, but but
no, that's
it's funny. I keep going back. It's not a new toy, but I go back to a Lego again for the same reasons. You can assemble it. You don't need tools.
Yeah.
I have a son who's 32 now, so I experienced Legos through him. And even we went down to Carlsbad, California, to Legoland once, and Legos. I mean, that is like the best not new toy. I mean, I just like that you're building.
Yeah, that's good. And just because I said new, that's a lot of people say, well, it's not new. That's fine. What do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
I don't worry about much. I'm not a worrier usually. At least, I've gone through periods, times in life where I have. But I kind of have as I get older, I've gotten over the major worrying, and I believe in things fall into a place for a reason. A little, and as cynical as I am, and I'm extremely cynical, I have a certain kumbaya-esque approach to life where things fall into place. You give, you take, things go around the full circle. I enjoy life. I enjoy being around people. So I don't really worry like that anymore. I mean, again, there were times, work projects, family situations, moving out of San Francisco, and but that I'll leave it at that. There's nothing else.
McLuhan learned from a poet that artists are the antenna of the race. They're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions. So we might be able to cope with what we don't like about our inventions. So, Mazzy, I asked you the question Marshall probed his whole career. Why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
Because most people don't care. They just want to get on with their lives, and I think, living in the modern world is a struggle for. I mean, every going back eons. I mean, every period of time there's struggles, and there's always been people struggling more than other people. I think just people don't have the time or the interest to pay attention to that. And the arts are very important to me. They still are, and I've studied them. Again, I'm kind of losing my train of thought to finish that thought.
Well, that's fine.
Yeah.
If things come back around, that's fine. Do artists have moral obligation?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think the root of it, no.
Yeah.
But I think people, whether not just artists, people get to a point where, um, I've had this conversation, and I need to extend this one a little bit because I don't shy away from politics and what things are going on in the world. And I've had some when I've been on live streams or uh, when something comes up happening in the world socially, I speak up about. I'm not afraid of that. I get responses occasionally, people getting very upset. I came here for the music. I'm unsubscribing. I don't want to hear about politics. I don't want to hear about Joe Biden, Donald Trump, you know, Netanyahu, whoever. I don't want to hear about that stuff. I don't want to hear about abortion. I don't want to hear about. I came here for the music. But to
Yeah.
me, politics is an important part of art work and
Yeah.
art creations. Now, not every the artists I love, they don't always do that. John Lennon, obviously, Bob Dylan, obviously, Phil Oakes, so many others, Patti Smith, um, talked about music. A lot of the artists I talk about, Woody Allen's probably less political in a way, yet socially he's very political in his cinema. Obviously,
Yeah.
Oliver Stone on the other end. I think you have to confront people, and I do applaud the artists that do put themselves out there and keep it up. Now, would I want that all the time? I don't do it all the time.
Yeah.
No, but I think that's an important part. And for people to kind of say, no, how dare you, you know, way back when the Dixie Chicks were on tour in Europe and bashed George Bush for some situation, W. Bush then, all the power to him as far as I'm concerned.
I,
Speak up.
I agree. Are you more afraid of new ideas or more afraid of old ideas?
Neither.
Yeah. Can you conjure up your earliest memory ever or one of them?
Uh, yes. In fact, I remember sitting in our we had an apartment in San Francisco on Lake and 25th Street, and I don't know how young I was, and I remember on the television seeing Howdy Doody, and
Yeah.
I remember that moment, like I remember that scene as if there was a camera behind me photographing me sitting on the floor looking at the television. Now, I'm sure what over the years I've reinvented what the scene looked like from behind me. But I remember looking at the Howdy Doody and was it the clown or whatever I forget the guy's name now.
Yeah.
I remember that moment. That's probably the earliest moment, and I was probably under two, 1.5. I don't even know how old I was.
Is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
Oh, it's a total blessing.
Yeah. Tell me someone within your immediate family, then outside your immediate family, just briefly, who had an impact on you, kind of like a role model, and what specifically was that impact?
Well, again, I said I was adopted, but my father, Paul, uh, born in Yugoslavia, came to San Francisco when he was 10. He really taught me manners, which sounds like, I mean, that whole thing about parents teaching you manners, and it just seems has gone away, gone away. And I'm
Yeah.
certainly not old school, and I'm very improvisational, and I'll say, I'll swear when it's appropriate, or I'll use foul. But there's a certain thing that I learned from my father, a certain respect and politeness from Paul. From, I don't know if it was because he was, from from Europe, coming from Yugoslavia and come from Europe, growing up in his family situation. But it was, to this day, I just remember there's certain courtesy, and it pisses me off when people aren't at least courteous. You can disagree, you can
Yeah.
argue, but there's a certain thing that fucking pisses me off now about that kind of stuff now.
I agree. I think politeness is a beautiful thing, and it's
Yeah,
not.
and not to be over polite and sappy, but just
Yeah.
little things like you're in a bank or you're going up to order a coffee in a cafe. You don't have to be on your phone. You're talking to someone while you're with a person. Engage with the person you're with.
Yeah.
That's like a modern version of that. So,
Yep, I agree. So then, outside your immediate family,
um, well, there's people I admire. You know, Michelle, I'm just going to say Michelle, who is the mother of my son. We never got married. So she's someone outside my immediate family, but I consider her family, and we're friends still. And there's a certain thing that I learned from her. She's an artist. She's one of the photographers I work with, or did work with. And I believe that she's a woman who could do anything if she wanted to. And she just goes for it. Now, sometimes it gets in the way. It's sometimes you can be your best, worst, best enemy in a way. But an artist so driven for a while in her career, in her life, and didn't have the family behind her, didn't have she had to do it all on her own. And the perseverance she had, I just admire so much. And I've learned so much from her in my life.
that's beautiful. And so, did your parents raise you a particular religion?
I was raised Jewish. My Paul Maslov, who married my mother when I was 7 years old, uh, was Russian Orthodox. He converted to Judaism when he married my mother. I had Orthodox grandparents. My grandmother lived with us, who was Jewish. I was bar mitzvahed. I went to Israel, my confirmation class. I became somewhat real religious, and for like 2 or 3 years, I taught Sunday school when I got back from Israel, and now I'm completely agnostic. I'm culturally Jewish and not religious anymore. I found out who my birth mother was only 5 years ago, and it turns out she was from Wheeling, West Virginia, not a Jew. And all these years, I was kind of led to believe that they made sure they adopted from a Jewish mother. Well, that turned out to be false. So I
Wow.
have a father somewhere. Nobody knows who he is. And apparently I'm 25% Jewish by birth, by blood. But I'm very culturally Jewish, definitely.
Yeah. Do you pray?
Not to a god. And no, I imagine things. I create,
Yeah.
like at night, you need to think about, do I worry? I lie in bed thinking, like, I imagine things. I don't pray.
If God exists, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
Yeah, I don't believe he exists or they exist.
Yeah. Do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
I think evil people exist, and I think what pisses me off. People twist out things. I mean, this is going back to the religion thing. The Bible, or whether you go for the 5 books of Moses, whether you go for the New Testament, Old Testament. I think this is where I've gone all off on most organized religions, because I think people have twisted uh, it around to their own selfish needs, and to put other people down and to push other people off. That's why I've been turned off by it. It's not the religious religion per se. I believe people. I think I'm a spiritual person, definitely,
Yeah.
but not a religious person. So
The question here is follow-up is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? And I set it up. Alan Watts said, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the mob and the samurai. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy. So it's a lot of thoughts, Mazzy. The basic question is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you respond to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
I think there's some truth and reality to that. In fact, that's a great thing growing up in San Francisco. I remember late at night on the FM stations, all those recordings of Alan Watts, they play Sunday nights, like in San Francisco, KMPX, KSAN. I used to listen to a bunch of them. But I think it depends on how you like it. When you start arguing and just going back and digging your feet in, and I think it just escalates and doesn't work. And whenever I don't want to say enemies, but maybe adversaries would be a better explanation for the people that I'm thinking about. I kind of use humor. Like, I get trolls occasionally on my. I'm sure we all get trolls commenting or coming in, and usually I try to ignore them until there's a point I feel I have to respond, and I don't necessarily respond to them, but I respond with humor. And I think it almost frustrates them more because they expect you to call them a effing asshole or something. And I think I try to take the it's like the Woody Allen again. Everything comes back to Woody Allen or John Lennon or something. I take that thing, and sometimes they don't understand that I'm actually being funny, and I seem so serious when I respond in that case if I'm doing it verbally. I did do a series. I haven't done it in a long time. Every once in a while I do these. I called Mazzy mix videos where I just new records, all kinds of things that are happening. Sometimes news stories that are related to music. But then I would really read maybe 5 to 10 comments and respond to them. And most of those comments were the trolling comments. It's like listen to a late night show, Letterman or something, respond to these crazy things. And I got more people liking my response because I did it in a sort of a humorous way and a tongue-in-cheek way. And I just left it at that. And I think that was the best way. I guess those are adversaries, but in a way they're sad being trolls more than anything else.
Yeah. We're going to get into humor and comedy. That was beautiful. But first, James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin about 100 years ago. He basically checked out. He said, this is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree? Years later, Faulkner said, sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism. Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
I think the simplest and most obvious answer is that we don't all experience the same life or the same place or the same time. So by seeing a film or seeing a painting or seeing a photograph or reading a book, I guess, you're projected, you're into another time, another place, another, if you live in the desert, you've never seen a rainforest or a forest or a river, or a lot of people I know have never seen an ocean. They don't live in the West or like in the States. So that's a place to see these things. I mean, sure, we all have trees, but Pacific Northwest are different trees than you have in Texas or, in Hawaii. So I think that, I think it's wonderful we have these things, and it's a blessing in so many ways. I mean, you go back to artwork, and whether it's art, why do they have to do cave artwork or in the pyramids or something? I mean, it's right there. They could go out and see real things. It's an expression, that's all, and it's great to share.
Now, Mazzy, walk us through just briefly the tipping point. You pursued a lot. You told us like how you got this interest in music and your love for music, and being a photo agent for 37 years. What was the tipping point where you go, that's what I want to pursue? Like, how did you form this aesthetic to love photography in particular, and not, well, I know you worked in the music business too. So just this tipping point, let's just stay on that for a second, to be a photo agent. And yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, that actually just was luck and timing. And I think anything with what we all do, good or bad, is luck and timing, or bad luck and bad timing. I, you know, at a young age, from like sixth, seventh grade, I would make 8mm movies and take pictures, and, you know, do photography in high school. Beyond that, you know, I did some filmmaking in college a little bit, but I never really had the drive or the to be a photographer, to be a filmmaker per se. And I was kind of lost. I mean, you know, after the music business thing ended and companies buying out, did that for about 10 years. I met a photographer, this Michelle again, and we met, and we became friends. We got involved, but then I started taking her portfolio out, because she was at this point doing catalog things and artsy things, and the photo agents, photo reps didn't understand the artsy side of her. And I loved her work, and I started literally taking her portfolio physically to ad agencies and to companies, just because. And I, you know, I did marketing and in the record business. So, you know, maybe the little 25% of Jewish DNA I do have has that little sales thing, the Willie Loman, the Willie Loman in me, to go out and do it. And so it was accidental for me, but it was me being close to the arts, and I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
And I found I was good for it, because other photographers would then call Michelle and say, "Hey, do you like this guy Maslov taking your book out?" And it grew into a business for all these years, and it worked out for the most part.
All the power to you. It's great. And then how we got to know each other was from me watching a few of your videos, and you said you've been doing that for about 5 years. What was the tipping point there where you go, oh, I'm going to do those?
Well, my videos are, again, on my journey in record collecting and music, and what it means to me. And to me, the core, I mean, I do the snarky stuff, these random pulls I call whack-a-mole, and I get really snarky. But there's a series I do every once in a while when I'm in the mood, and it's called Memories of a Vinyl Junkie. And it's very autobiographical. And I just started when I would pick a year, let's say 1967, and I would show a handful of records in that year, and I would talk about what I was experiencing, what I was doing, you know, later, the loves I, you know, went through, the personal relations that I went through, and talk for anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour and a half. And for whatever reason, people gravitated to those videos in a way, you know, obviously, I'm sure my audience, I know it, audience skews older, and they'll say, then they would share their experience. Yeah, I remember when I bought that Grateful Dead record. I remember, you know, I visited San Francisco, or I went to London. And they became very popular. And I keep thinking of projects I want to do within that. And every once in a while I revisit. I've done maybe 15 or 18 of them now, and I revisit these years. But there is this kind of loosely based thing within YouTube called the vinyl community. People showcasing their record collections. Some just, you know, pick up a record and say, you know, record next, I bought this. All good and well, but that's not what I want to do. I want to tell a story. I like the story behind the records and everything. So it just happened like that. And then it started growing. And then I did a few, and people started watching. But during the pandemic, obviously, like 3 years ago, we all had so much time. And that's when it really exploded. And I think I have almost 26,000 subscribers now. And so people are watching and commenting and interacting. And I've met great people through it. So that's how it worked for me. And so it's been a fun ride.
That was really powerful and kismet. But could you hold that particular album up to the camera one more time slowly? Because, you know, this is Hannah Brooks.
Yeah, this just happens to be here.
Yeah, well, happened. It's very freaky because my wife and I I was trying to get my wife, who's a great jazz singer, to become an interviewer many years ago. And Hada was our first interview as a team. And Hada is an amazing character. And that cover is so intriguing. And I was just freaking.
1957.
Yeah, and we're doing a Hada Brooks song in an upcoming show, in fact.
Oh,
And
nice.
she's super powerful. So that was just kismet. But to go back to this, you choosing to use video as this way to express yourself. A screenwriting teacher told me a great film is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Stanley Kubrick says a great film is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. What role does intention play in your creative process when you're making one of your videos?
I think it's an important role. I mean, again, I've had people say, I've had some great response, but every once in a while there's someone that says, "Oh, this guy has a huge ego." To do this shit on YouTube, you have to have an ego. You have to be out there. If you're going to act, I did study acting for about 4 years in the late 80s in San Francisco with a woman, Jean Shelton, who just died in the last 2 years, I believe. And I have always had sort of this, show thing. I want to get out there and
Yeah.
show. Again, with sales, I mean, that's again the Willie Loman thing, I guess. And I like to be on. I like to be creative. I like to interact. And so, of course, I'm showing myself. I'm putting myself out there. I'm letting my hair down or my bald head down under my hat. And it's been a real pleasure. And I've learned actually it has helped me because I feel I'm fairly articulate, but I always had this problem and tripping over my lips. I have not a diagnosis because in our generation they didn't. I think I have a little bit of a dyslexia, right? Twist words and
Yeah.
certain words I jumble them up in sentences. I jumble up. And when I used to get up there, I don't mind being in front of people, but if I didn't have a script, I would forget things. I'd go blank. But doing this, doing the YouTube thing and my channel has been the best therapy I've ever experienced because
Yeah.
I don't write notes out. That's not true. I might put a couple of pinpoints, places I want to get to in front of me or on the side of me, but then I just turn the camera on and I improvise.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty good at improvising because what I'm talking about is stuff I know about. The records, the music, my stories, my experiences in San Francisco as a kid, riding to Golden Gate Park to see the Jefferson Airplane or something,
Yep. Yeah, I saw them there once hitchhiking across the country because I was from Michigan and saw the Dead and Jefferson Airplane in a free park concert. And it's memorable in my life just to remember. I hitchhiked it. So Duchamp said there's no art without an audience. How much do you think of your viewer when you're making your video?
I don't.
Yeah.
In fact, I do so many videos in so many different genres of music. Like I'll do avant-garde to ambient a little bit. I'll do jazz, I'll do rock, I'll do punk, I'll do, soul, I'll do classical, Indian classical. I just realized not every presentation I create is for everybody. I don't mind having segmented audiences. So I don't think of them. I respect them, but I'm not going to talk down and I'm not going to expect them to like everything I do or say. So no.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that you did Sun Ra too. That to me is
Oh yeah,
always
yeah.
important.
And
Important.
I'm like a novice at his stuff. It's
Yeah.
so much music and you could step in and do something that's freaky out there and
Yeah.
something that's just very relaxing. So you never know what you're going to get.
Yeah. My favorite Sun Ra thing is he produced and made homemade label 200 albums, and then he
Right.
got signed to Atlantic Records. So there was an ad in Rolling Stone and it said Sun Ra's first major label release, and it was like, so fucking what? He's released 200 albums before this.
over the holidays, I finally picked up this. I don't have it here; it's upstairs.
Yeah,
This beautiful book that has like all these hand, him and the bands used to hand draw the covers and creations and the labels. And there's a beautiful art book, I think, published out of Seattle of hundreds of these covers. Beautiful
yeah.
book.
That is amazing. Well, I talked to Michael Apted, the filmmaker, 40 years ago. I said, why do rock video editors feel so obliged to edit fast? Most people don't know Abel Gance invented rapid montage in 1922 in France, but it really flourished in 80s when MTV started, to the point where Marty Scorsese says, I cut my films faster because of MTV. So Michael Apted said, because we've learned to take in information faster. So I asked this question with a bias. Can we literally learn to take in information faster, or are we just brainwashed to believe we can?
Oh, I'm totally believe we can, but it's been to the detriment of certain kind of cinema now seems to bore a certain segment of the audience. I mean, there's some movies like a Kubrick film. Someone watches 2001 and it's like paint drying for them. Just the slowness walking around the Jupiter spacecraft, or what one of my favorite directors was always when I got into him was Francois Truffaut. I really liked his style, and and that's funny. That's what I enjoy about even going back to Woody Allen again. Is so influenced by Bergman when he has those scenes where it's just a lockdown shot on a room, and the couple may walk in and out of the room, not panning, not cutting to them, conversation. And I like when you let it play out, like watching Bergman films. I mean,
Yeah.
I got this Bergman Criterion box a couple years ago, and I have a couple people who are younger, in their 40s, younger than me, and I tried to play them some of these movies, and they just can't. They're not having it for the most part. Maybe some Fellini at times, but that kind of 80s thing. Everybody wants anything now, immediate, that instant gratification. So I think that's almost did the opposite to the brain. It kind of turns them off to some of that. Now I don't know if that's across the board, but that's my problem with it. But I like those fast cut videos. I mean, it's like the end of Kubrick in 2001, of course, during
Yeah.
the psychedelic whatever, Jupiter and Beyond segment.
Yeah. Can humans literally multitask?
Yes.
Yeah. So let's jump into, you brought up Woody again. Let's jump into comedy for a section. What's the function of laughter?
I think it's just to take us out of our body and let it out. It's kind of letting the air out of a balloon. I
Yeah.
just think it relieves the tension. That's the part I like about it, for myself, the reaction I get.
Yeah. Gurdjieff says the function of laughter is the reconciliation of yes and no. So there's something going on there, because McLuhan loved to quote Steve Allen. He says, behind every joke, there's a grievance. And maybe even just put aside the word every. Behind jokes, there's a grievance. Any comment on that?
Well, don't you think some of these writers and philosophers and artists in their own genre almost overanalyze what maybe comedy is or music is? Marshall McLuhan says that it's future shock, and Alan Toffler, after at some point, it is like Woody Allen would even joke about it. It's like this mental masturbation. I mean, sometimes it just is what it is. Do we have
Yeah.
Marshall McLuhan says and Alan Toffler says? I mean, right? I mean, sometimes
Well,
we
that's
just want.
funny. Mazzy, that's funny. I'm glad you said that, because it's a perfect example of me, because my friends sometimes go, say it in your own words. Quit dropping so many quotes. And
Well, yeah,
the funny,
there's it's kind of like watching, William F. Buckley on a conversation with Groucho
right,
Marx or something, and after a while, it's just like, what the fuck? I mean, what is this shit? And what's great about it, Woody, like when you see Woody, there's a scene in Woody Allen. you know, I know people like now they love to hate Manhattan, and Manhattan's a beautiful film. I know with
Yes.
the young woman, a younger woman, older man, but when he's sitting there, when he misses her, and he's sitting talking to his tape recorder, and he just says the things he loves in life, and he
Yeah.
says like he says some food thing at some or the something at some restaurant or some bakery, and he says Groucho Marx, and he says I don't know if he says King Oliver or whatever jazz artist. He said, you know, because he loves that kind of all these is the
Yeah.
wonderful Louis Armstrong, the wonderful Duke Ellington, the wonderful things in life, and you know, he's not saying, you know, it's kind of like you know film criticism to a point where it got so you know, oh, the mise en scène of the gestalt of the frame of the yeah, and I get that, and I'm not against that, but after a while, it gets to be just enjoy the fucking movie. That's why I can just watch Cabin Boy or whatever, some of the weirdest or Romeo and Michelle's high school reunions. I can watch the stupidest comedy sometimes, and then I
Yeah.
can go watch a Bergman film, Scenes from
Yeah.
a Marriage or something. That's a whole different thing, you know. I mean, even Woody Allen, again, going Annie Hall might be the best movie ever made because you'll go back to it, and he takes on his date to going to see The Sorrow and the Pity or something for the 30th time, right?
Yeah.
So that's that.
No,
I
it's
mean,
really
after a while,
important. Yeah.
yeah. And I'm
It's
not
really,
against you know
no, I
intellectual
know. I know. No, it's
critiquing
really
stuff.
important.
But it's easy to mock. It's kind of like in my videos, like I did a video once, it got the most controversial, which is wasn't controversial at all. But since we're going on, I'm going to tell this story because it was prog music for people who hate prog music,
Oh yeah.
and you know prog rock like Yes and King Crimson
Yeah.
and Emerson and Palmer. Where and I went on, and I like some that period of prog, and I liked it, and it got to be you know progressive rock, and these songs started getting you know 5 minutes and 10 minutes and 20 minutes and two record sets and you know syncopation and different timing, different key changes, and it got to be like masturbatory rock and roll, like overwrought and too big. And I talked about there's one drummer, Bill Bruford, who's played in almost every prog band at one
Yeah.
point, and I kind of said, you know, he'll go from 2/6 time to 7/8 time to 56/42. And of course, I'm making this shit up. I don't know the timings in this. And I always said Bill Bruford is on every other prog record ever made, and I did it like that. And people like Bill Bruford wasn't on every prog record. People, you know, and they would respond like that. But it was I liked it. It was a fun video. But
Yeah.
it's the easiest genre to mock that
Yeah.
almost in any other genre. So I know
Bombastic.
I got way off key, off topic
No,
there,
no, no,
but
you didn't, because this is the whole purpose of my interviews is to go off on these tangents because that's where the really great stuff is. Because of course I'm going to quote people continuously onward, but it's still like a joke because John Cage says, "I have nothing to say, and I'm saying it."
and he says it like in how many what's how many seconds minutes of silence is
Yeah,
that piece?
4 minutes and 33 seconds. But
Yeah.
also dropping Alan Toffler's name is hilarious because he sat at McLuhan's feet and learned everything he knew, and then he didn't get McLuhan completely. So it's
Well,
funny.
we're in that generation of all that kind of stuff was big. Remember when like the biggest book in a year was "I'm okay, you're okay,"
Oh yeah,
and all you know all that kind of stuff. So you
yeah.
know,
No, it's endless. But you know, I asked my friend who wrote comedy with Robin Williams, I says, can satire be destructive? And he said, that's the job of satire. But if me or you do a cartoon in a certain country and they kill us, some people think dying is destructive. So it's actually Jonathan Swift compared satire to a mirror in which people could see every face but their own. And indeed, I was really happy that you did do something on Zappa because he gets poo-pooed by so many of our generation. And he said, watch the Nazis run your town. Now go home and check yourself. You think we're singing about somebody else. So, you know, he's a satirist. What's
my
the, yeah, go
go
ahead.
ahead.
Well,
Well,
what's the,
my first oh, ask the question. I'll tie it in here. Go ahead.
the prompt is basically what's the function of satire? So you can go wherever you want there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um. Yeah. You brought it before we went on to about Zappa a couple times. Obviously, you're a big Zappa guy. I love Frank Zappa. I only saw him once around, I think it's 73 or 74 when Jean-Luc Ponty was playing with him at
Yeah,
Winterland. Um, but I remember 1966 at this local music store, record shop, music store, instruments, got my guitar there and that kind of stuff, had records. And I remember looking in, and for, I don't know if it was, I can't remember if it was every day I went in there, or every week for a few weeks. In those days, I think timing was, seemed like forever or shortened, but seeing, I guess, was it Freak Out 1966, the first double album, the first
yeah,
album. Is that Freak Out, right? Yeah,
yeah. Freak Out's the
yeah,
first because you did that whole thing about
right.
your mom letting you buy Mother Mania.
Oh, you remember
That
that?
is
Well, that was a couple. That was 69, I think. That was later.
that's a beautiful
But I remember
story.
going in there and seeing Freak Out, and like a couple times almost buying it with my allowance money or money I'd
Yeah,
saved up. And records were what, $3, 2.75 then. But still, you had to save up, and you just didn't buy anything then.
yeah,
And I finally bought it and brought it home. And of course, you devour the cover, everything in
yeah,
there, and of course, on a mother's, all the stuff in there. Is that Susie cream cheese, all that stuff? But
yeah,
I I just fell in love with that record and the subsequent record, and then, Brown Shoes, and then, of course, later, We're Only In It For the Money, with the replica inside of Sergeant Pepper and
yeah,
mocking the hippies in San Francisco, and I thought that stuff was brilliant. Of course, I followed later, and I got into, the stuff he did in the '70s and the On Tour and the more fusiony classical stuff, and but those first few records, in a way, going back like comedy, they're almost like comedy records, but they
yeah.
were serious comedy records.
That's good to put it that way because they asked Frank, are you the Marx Brothers of rock? And he goes, no, we're more like the Three Stooges of rock.
Right? And wasn't he? Was it Steve Allen? Was it a What's My Line when he's doing the bicycle?
Yeah, on Steve Allen's show, he plays the bicycle, but he also
Yeah,
said what you just said was, I'm very serious about being not serious.
yeah,
And the other thing you said about in your video, which I really liked, was you're talking about apostrophe, because the beautiful thing about apostrophe is Frank played a lot of guitar solos like Jerry Garcia. And in the long run, they're doodling a lot. And of course, now it's like guitar, you know, guitar god solo thing is overblown completely in a way. But he grew up cruising around in his car, in his truck with Captain Beefheart, listening to the first rock and roll albums where the solos were usually saxophones and they
right.
could sing the sax solo. The solos Frank plays on Apostrophe and Overnight, you can sing. They're singable, so they're not like la, 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 la. They're singable solos, and that's why you said, "Well, this is almost Frank's commercial album," and it's like in it's so not commercial, but it is more accessible than
Well, it
most.
don't need the yellow snow, great googly moogly, all that. I mean,
Well, you
maybe
got that
because
from Noel Orange.
I that my buddy Coleman and I, my buddy who passed away a year and a half ago,
Yeah,
we were working at this record store in San Francisco when that album came out, and we used to play side one of that record, especially all the time, and where we knew
yeah,
everything about it.
yeah,
So I think to us that seemed very commercial at the time because it
yeah.
was
It was.
selling more. Don't the
Yeah,
Yellow Snow is kind of comedy, but not really, and for some reason it was accessible to people who were not maybe into the other Mothers albums in a way.
yeah,
I don't know. I mean, not like
yeah,
Valley Girl later or anything.
yeah. So, what's more important, Mazzy, conviction or compromise?
Conviction.
T.S. Eliot said poetry's outing your inner dialogue. What language is your inner dialogue in?
No language is my own language.
That's good. Two of my film heroes have this mantra. George Manupelli says, ignore yourself. Jonas Mekas says, there is no self-expression. And Cecil Taylor says, I'm just a vehicle and this stuff just comes through me. Is art making, music making more self-expression or more you're a vehicle for whatever cultures and environments and technologies are dominant?
I think it's just more self-expression. Yeah.
You know, it's interesting though, just to step off on this, because I'm curious. Like they asked Ginger Baker, where'd you get your drum sound? And he says, I was in London when they were bombing. Boom, 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 boom. And then they asked James Brown's drummer, where'd you know, you're the architect of, yeah, you know, they said, you're the architect of funk drumming. Where'd you get your drum sound from? And James Brown's drummer says, I lived in Ohio, and on one side of me was a factory, on the other side was a train track. So it was like, boom, boom, you know, so we are affected. And then the funniest was the guy from Negative Land told me Missy Elliott learned how to sing from car alarms. So, I mean, there is this sensibility. You worked with artists for so many years. How much is that vehicle or channeling thing in your sensibility? Like, how do you handle that when artists do say that? Oh, I'm just a channel, or I'm just a vehicle.
Well, I don't recall anyone saying that. I think I've gotten a lot out of it myself. And the best thing, aside from the business point and the obvious, that's what I did for a living, but I enjoyed it. And I still, for the most part, enjoy it. But there's nothing, for me at least, there's nothing like being around artists.
Yeah.
And whether it's photographers who are artists, by the way, some people don't think so. Now you never know with a camera, everyone thinks they're a photographer or whatever, but that's okay too. There's nothing wrong with that either. But being around musicians, seeing live music and knowing painters and the exploration of all forms and all arts is the most exciting thing still in my life. Music is the one I keep gravitate to most. But again, going back, we talked about cinema and film. I mean, going back to my friend who managed the Surf Theater, there was a time when, like, literally in my freshman in college, and when he was working there for about 3 or 4 years, I would see almost every week, 5, 6, 7 films, and that's when they would have Kurosawa week, and they had Truffaut week, and the French New Wave, and Sajjad Rai in films from India. I mean, I would see all these films and this is before we had VHS and home video. So I would see all these films that most people around the world don't get a chance to see. Unless you're in like New York or London or Paris or San Francisco. Then, I mean, that was a time in the 70s. San Francisco had the most screens per capita than anywhere in the United States, more than New York, more than anything in terms of, and they had, foreign films and indie films, what we call indie then. And I would, go see everything. I soak that stuff in. And I mean, that was the best education. All that education, seeing the music, seeing the films is better than college for me. In a way, my bachelor's was kind of a waste. I mean, I'm glad I did it. I feel an accomplishment, but I don't have all the names to quote like you do. I can throw out an Alan Toffler or a certain filmmaker, but that's okay too. It's just different.
No, dude, you've dropped some great names, Kurosawa, all these. But what was your friend's name who managed the Surf Theater?
His name is David Bacon, and he's this guy I did this Beatles England book with in 1982. He lives in Massachusetts. He was a high school teacher, science teacher. He retired 2 years ago. And
it's interesting because I think this question could apply to you, Mazzy. And Ben Ratliff, the music writer, says, I mean sound as has long functioned among jazz players as a mystical term of art, as in every musician finally needs a sound, a full and sensible embodiment of their artistic personality, such that it can be heard at best in a single note. So me or you could hear Miles and know, oh, that's Miles. We could hear Jerry Garcia couple notes and go, that's Jerry. He called Miles fragile and pointed, Coltrane slightly undercooked and urgent. If someone was going to describe Mazzy in all your creativeness in a couple words, what 2 words, like someone you really respected, they go, they got Mazzy. What 2 words would you feel honored and say, hey, that guy got me?
Improvisational and spontaneous.
Oh, that is good. So that's evoking the art gallery in Venice that I worked at for many years in it was where the Beats were born, Venice West Cafe, and it turned into Sponto Gallery.
Have you been in Venice a long time?
43 years, yeah.
Oh, because I remember as a photo agent, I went, this is the late 88, 89 maybe. I had to bring a portfolio to Dennis Hopper in his house there, the Frank Gehry house.
Yeah, that's
yeah.
That's
And I met Dennis then because Michelle photographed him. It was around the time right after the David Lynch film came out, Blue Velvet.
Yeah.
And he wanted to see the book before he was photographed. So I went there in the little area off one, I don't know what street it was, but I know it's a big compound. But the one with the art gallery and the little stage, he had a little rehearsal space.
Yeah, that's there on Indiana, right off. Yeah, it's a beautiful spot. But like 3 blocks from there is, I just wanted to tell you, because having those 2 words, that's what Mark Kornfeld did. He called himself Sponto Gallery, spontaneous and pronto. So he put them together, Sponto. So there's another friend that says the 3 T's of music are taste, theory, and technique. So you can learn how to play the guitar. You can learn, oh, here's the chord structure. How does one acquire taste? And this is even in photography, in film, and in music. How do you acquire taste?
As the creator or as the viewer?
Well, either way, as a user or the creator.
I don't, the tastemakers, I guess the critics, decide what's tasteful, what's not. I don't know. I don't necessarily believe that taste.
But I mean, why do you gravitate towards the music you have? There's something that makes you gravitate towards something.
Well, I think originality has a lot to do with it. There's a pleasantness if it's a good, like, I love harmony vocals. Like I'll take going back, like brotherly harmonies are like nothing else. Like the Everly Brothers and the Louvin Brothers in terms of country and gospel. I love gospel music, that kind of stuff. But also every once in a while, certain Lennon McCartney had it. They obviously not brothers, but they had a certain tonality of their voices, how they fused together, where John's a little lower and a little hoarse in a way. I mean, you wouldn't think of John as a hoarse voice, but when you listen to his voice, it's got a timbre. Paul McCartney's is pure and higher. And those 2 together, especially in their like early, like 64, 5, even 66, when they were really doing, they were, influenced by the Everly Brothers and obviously Buddy Holly, that kind of stuff. But that thing just melts me, and certain guitar tones and stuff. I don't know about taste. I have a thing. I like melody, but also I like sometimes when things are atonal. Like certainly there's some, going back to Zappa, there's some stuff that it's very palatable, and some stuff that is atonal. Like, oh God, I can't stand that. Not me, but I'll put that on if someone's in the house or visiting. It's like listening to an Eric Dolphy record or something that is like free jazz that, it's not for everybody. And I totally get that it's not for everybody. I'm not one that's going to say, oh, you're not cool enough to like free jazz. Ornette Coleman is I don't know if it's an acquired taste. You're talking about taste. It is, okay, maybe that's where taste comes in, but you have to learn maybe to like it.
Yeah.
I don't know anyone that just will listen to a Dolphy or an Ornette Coleman record right away. Or to me, I'm a fan of Yoko Ono. Most people I know can't listen to Yoko Ono. But there's something, and I know she doesn't have a great voice, but to me, that's not the point. The intent and the presentation, it's like conceptual art. I've had dragged down debates about conceptual art. I think it's hysterical sometimes, and I love it. And people saying, oh, that's not art. I could have done that. Well, you didn't. You didn't splatter paint like Jackson Pollock or something.
That's back to Sun Ra. The guy goes backstage and he says, my kid could play that. And Sun Ra went, but can he transcribe it? So this is funny because I was going to ask a question about Aaron Copland's four elements of music: melody, harmony, rhythm, and tone color. You covered that really well. So let's move back to taste for a second. And again, this is McLuhan. Song is slowed down speech. The reason cultures have different musical taste is ultimately connected to language difference. So I know you talked about how you soothe your soul with like Ravi Shankar music.
Mm-hmm.
Any comment on this idea? The reason cultures have different musical taste is connected to language difference. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I can't attribute it directly to language difference, but there is something about how our ears perceive music. And I think the example that, again, going to, you mentioned Ravi Shankar, I got into Ravi Shankar like a lot of people my age because of George Harrison, the Beatles on Rubber Soul, and then the sitar, and then Revolver especially, and then of course Sergeant Pepper. And at the time, listening to Within You Without You, and a lot of people at that time said, "Oh, that's kind of a song I want to skip." But to me, it's one of the most beautiful. That and A Day in the Life are the two key pieces on that album, as far as I'm concerned. Within You Without You is a gorgeous piece of music. I mean, obviously the instrumentation and the orchestration, the hybrid of Western and Eastern music. But when I started listening around that period, George Harrison's songwriting changed with minor chords and different. I don't know if it's. Again, I'm not a musician. I play shitty guitar, but in terms of descriptions, the tonality or the what's the word I'm thinking of? And not keys, but Indian music has a certain different scaling in a way than Western music.
Yeah.
And whenever I sometimes would play these Eastern records for people, they didn't like the vocals on some of Ravi records or some other Indian records that mix it. There's certain the differences are so true. Like the scales are so different, and is it because of the language and how they were created, a different continent, a different people? You listen to Native American, Indian, Native American music, and the chanting of Native Americans, and it's very different too. Or Asian music. I mean, all these different continents and different time periods had these different things. You could go again into into yodeling, into
Yeah.
the Tennessee mountains and certain things like that, or bluegrass, things
Yeah.
like that. I don't know if it's more the places. I don't know. I mean, I'm saying this long answer. The bottom line is I don't know, but there are very differences in it. But again, the Indian music was the first one where I really noticed. It's almost like they were writing in a different pattern of chords.
Yeah.
I just think of chords because I would learn chords in guitar.
Yeah.
I don't read music, and it was so different.
Well,
And
what's more?
I was 13 years old or 12 years
Yeah.
old.
Well, I think you were a sharp listener like me. We were just tuned to this. This was like vibrating part of our culture with the
Right.
transistor radios, and the car radio was so important. We were surrounded by it. What's more fundamental, music or language?
Fundamental in what way? I know you're not going to answer that because that's the questions.
Yeah, I mean, just what we basically think is ground. Well, maybe even what came first, music
Well,
or language.
I think music is more universal.
Yeah,
I'll put it that way.
that's
I'll leave it at that.
that's a good word. Tell me an instrumental that makes you laugh. Can't be Spike Jones, not someone who does.
I wasn't going to even say Spike. That makes me
Good.
laugh. That makes me laugh is what's the name of the song? The Herb Alpert song. Da 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 da.
Good.
Herb Alpert and Tijuana Brass make me smile. As
Yeah.
great as that overplayed, and those records, Tijuana Taxi, all those. I mean, all these Jewish guys pretending they're Mexicans. I mean, that's probably politically correct these days, but it's just it's amazing how popular those records were.
And a back to packaging, great album covers too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is perception reality?
Oh, that's like one of those, that reminds me, and this is again, talk about politically correct. Remember that Bill Cosby album? He's holding the inflatable thing is why is there air, the ball or something.
Right.
So reality, perception. Reality is reality. Perception is just how someone perceives that reality. I mean, the reality is real, but some people don't perceive it as real, and that's a problem. Going back to an earlier answer I had, a lot of people don't believe in reality, even with facts.
Yeah. Well, I like Lily Tomlin. Reality is just a collective hunch. Okay, so tell me, Mazzy, one major element of your creativeness, your mazziness that's changed, and one major element that stayed the same in the years you've been doing this.
I think because of the YouTube thing and using the camera more on myself, which is an unusual thing when you really think about it. It's a recent phenomena, right? The YouTube and all this.
Yeah.
At least for the masses, I should say. People would do experimental video and filmmaking. I've learned to tell a story better. I
Yeah.
think. And I wasn't sure, but by the reaction, I can do my beginning, middle, and end, and do some build up, and I'm surprised how many people follow and seemingly enjoy it. Of course, there's always people that don't. And what's the second part of that?
What's stayed the same?
I'm very repetitive. I tell the same things over and over again, same stories, which I think a lot of communicators do.
Yep. Moshe Feldenkrais works with healing and movement. He says it's literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength rather than we're normally taught to overcome a weakness. Tell me a weakness you turned into a strength.
I think I'm doing it right now. My smirk. And this is going to sound egotistical again. I have a certain smirk and twinkle that I can do, and I can keep a straight face to a point, but I have this little like mischievous. I've been busted about this where, someone will say Maslov, my mother died, and I'll start like it's kind of like a Larry David in a way where, I mean, he can keep a straighter face, or maybe Seinfeld has it where I have this smirk like the cat that ate the canary, and I've learned to use it for good and not evil.
Yeah. It's a really, really good example, dude. I appreciate that. So we got about 13 more minutes. This has been super fun. I appreciate your time here. Fill in the blank. Anger can be a productive emotion when
you don't direct it at a specific person.
It's good. What's the most significant difference between men and women, physical aside?
Patience. Women have it more, and that's not always the case, but I think more so than not.
Utah Phillips said, anarchy is making rules for yourself and not other people. Who's entitled to make the rules?
Ooh, well, I mean, the people need to, and the people, I mean, I know the easiest thing is government. We have to have rules in a civilized nation. And of course, people are pissed off at the politicians, yet they keep voting the same ones in all over. So I blame the people, and the people make the rules, even though they don't believe they make the rules.
It's really good, Mazzy, because it leads into this. John Basil Barnhill, socialist, said, where the people fear the government, you have tyranny. Where the government fears the people, you have liberty. In fact, in 2005, the film V for Vendetta paraphrased it and said, people should not be afraid of their governments. Governments should be afraid of their people. How do you personally handle false fears like the war on poverty or the war on terrorism, or the best is the war on drugs? You can't have a war on drugs because drugs can't fight, and you can't say no to drugs because drugs don't talk. So these false fears that are created, how do you personally handle them?
That's so much there. I mean, oh God. I get in these I don't even know. I lost my train of thought. I'm gonna pass on that one.
No, that's all right. Yeah, because I
Yeah.
would love to hear you in the future sometime tell me, because it is something, there's a lot of fear created by the government constantly to control people. And is it there purposely to control people, or is it just like a byproduct of
Well,
when we
I
make
don't think the governments are. Well, actually, some governments are set up to control people,
yeah,
and there is a certain order you put on things, and then what happens is there's certain personalities or certain players that again, it's like in a way, it's like religion. I think government basically can be a good thing, and it's good for the people because they've created
yeah,
it and do good things. And whether it's you go simple as our roads, people complain about taxes, but they don't want the potholes. They want their garbage picked. They want, I mean, that's not a tax really. You pay for that anyway. But they want the things that the government provides. Um, I, I think people twist it around, and especially now. And I don't think we've really. I shouldn't say we haven't before, but the last several years, and with the expansion of things like YouTube and social media, there are people getting involved that are doing it. Not that people, I was going to say for selfish ways. They're always selfish politicians and
yeah,
selfish, self-centered people. But now in a dangerous level, and
yeah.
really dangerous level, as far as I'm concerned. And I'm getting political here now. And what's scary about it for me, it's the followers, like blind followers in uh, religious people are following people, and literally they're telling you out front how fucked up they are and how they're cheating the system, yet people still follow them, and they're missing that thing, and that drives me crazy. I know that's not an exact answer to your question, but
No,
that's the
but
whole thing that drives me crazy.
yeah, no, it is interesting because, like, should TikTok not be able to broadcast how to steal someone's car with, the new little clicker and something? Kids
Oh
just say,
yeah,
here's how to
yeah.
steal people's car. So do they go on and say, no, you can't do that? So you brought up storytelling, and I'm curious to hear this one. Hollis Frampton, the great experimental filmmaker, said, narrative is born among the animal necessities of the spirit because we're waiting to die. Can you forget to die?
Sure.
Way to go.
It's funny. Again, I'm gonna like call you on all these like names you're quoting, and I want to say Peter Frampton once says, "Doobie doobie wah, doobie doobie wah." Frampton
Yeah.
comes alive,
No,
1977, or
you should
something.
call me on it, because that's what
You
when
know,
Frank wrote "I've Been in You." Peter Frampton said, I'm in you." Frank wrote a song, "I've Been in You."
Gene Vincent once said, "Beep bop a loo bob, she's my baby." You see what I did there? You remember Steve Allen read that thing like that on his show way back. The kind of absurdity of rock lyrics way
Oh,
back.
Stan Freberg's whole
Yeah.
thing on rock is amazing. Well, we read Finnegan's Wake out loud with a group of people, so we know what that's all about. In fact, did you know in the $100 Beatles book, John Lennon said when he read Finnegan's Wake by James Joyce, it felt as though he was talking to a friend.
Hmm.
And do you know the flip on that?
You're going to tell me.
Holden Caulfield in
Oh,
Catcher in the Rye says,
right.
when I read a book, it feels like I'm talking to a friend. And
Yeah.
what book was in the back pocket of the guy who shot
Yeah.
John?
Yeah. He had that copy with him. I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. How do you find peace of mind?
Music, playing music.
Yeah. If you were walking down the street today and you met yourself as a 12-year-old, what would you say to your 12-year-old self?
Practice the guitar more. I, I would explain to him there's certain things. At first I was going to say you can edit some future missteps, and let me tell you how. But I think I'm going to take that back because I think those missteps help you
Yeah.
get where you are. So
Yeah, that's exactly when I said turn a weakness into a strength. You can turn breakdowns into breakthroughs or rejections into redirections. These are 5 Alan Watts questions just off the top of your head in a few words. 1, who started it all?
Eve, and I don't believe Eve existed.
That's pretty good. I thought you were going to say the Beatles. I've had 2 people say Louis Armstrong. So are we going to make it?
Yes.
Where did it?
I'm sorry?
Where do we put it?
In the sock drawer where you hide your condoms.
Just like some nappy little pamphlet in your dad's bottom drawer. Do you know what an 8-pager is? A Tijuana Bible?
A copy
Check
of Swank.
No, check it out. Tijuana Bibles are
Okay.
8-pagers. They're this big. And they're what Frank Zappa was referring to, just like some nappy little pamphlet in your daddy's bottom
Is it
drawer.
like the Light Tower pamphlets or those whatever they call
Yes,
it?
it's like a Light Tower pamphlet, but it came out and they're like have Popeye with boners. They're like porno they're porno cartoons from many years ago.
I did
And
not know that. I
no,
learned something today.
look it up online. You'll
I don't think I want to Google that.
That's a good one, Mazzy. Okay, 4th Alan Watts is who's cleaning it up?
We all are.
5th, is it serious?
Yes, but it doesn't have to be.
Very good. A couple more and we're out of here. If a publisher was to release your autobiography off the top of your head, what would the title be?
Oh, it's already on my. It's Memories of a Vinyl Junkie.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And I don't have a publisher. I don't have a book or anything. But I've done this series, and it's sort of that. And if anyone's watching, you can find me here.
Good. In your website. So if the publisher did publish it and they wanted to scent the glue and the binding, what smell?
Not patchouli oil. I'll just leave it at that. I'll just anything but patchouli oil.
Dude, you really got great ESP. I knew we were sort of connected like Siamese. Do you know where I got that question was because that's what Madonna put her book. She scented the glue in her book with patchouli.
Oh,
So
really?
I formed the question. But I'll tell you, George.
Jerry, this is like the biggest psychobabble interview I've ever been on.
Well, I take that as a compliment. You know, when I interviewed,
I do that in a tongue-in-cheek way, but it's like that cynical thing. There's a cynical side of me that I love it. I believe it. It's great. But there's like, Miley Cyrus once said in a song
I
in
know.
2017.
Well, this is it. George Clinton. I did the longest interview with George Clinton ever, and it's most of these questions. I said, "You want to scent the glue in your binding?" What did he say? Fried chicken.
Yeah.
Okay, if a statue was built in your honor, where would you want it displayed, and what would it be made of?
Oh, it'd have to be in San Francisco's Golden Gate Park because I was born literally across the street from the park on Stanion Street. And it should be, God, you're near the fog and it's got to be strong, but you can't have wood because it'll, I mean, stone is the obvious thing. Sometimes stone, but not expensive granite or marble, just something that'll last, I guess.
Good. Tell me something good you never had and you never want.
This is going to sound so sexist. Kate Beckinsale.
That's not sexist. That's
she is.
Yeah, you never had her. Yeah, you answered it right.
But I want her, but I don't really want her. This beautiful English actress, but she is funny as hell. What makes it, aside from her beauty, her physical beauty, she is the funniest, snarkiest son of a bitch. She's so great, and I mean that in a positive way.
No, that's beautiful. One of my favorite answers is, tell me something good you never had and you never want. They go, sex with Janet Jackson.
Well, there you go. Well, I'm close, but not, it's a different.
Well, my friend asked Johnny Carson that question. It comes from neuro-linguistic programming. And Johnny Carson says, I don't know what it is, but tell me when you figure it out.
That's a good.
The answer I get the most is fame, money, and heroin. Okay, 4 more, we're out of here. If you were in a vat of vomit up to your neck and someone threw a bag of shit at your face, what would you do?
Shower.
Very good. What's the cultural shift you see developing today that inspires you?
Some more people speaking up from, again, I go back to the politics, a segment of people speaking up who were, and I hate to, again, well, not hate to go, Democrats, Republicans, I know not the end all, a segment of Republicans who are coming out and are talking truthful, which is a weird shit ass thing to say, because even when, being a lefty, I'm a Democrat, but I'm not a socialist. I'm a moderate Democrat, maybe. Republicans I never agreed with in terms of their policies, but it really wasn't about lying for the most part. I mean, there's liars there on all sides and all that, cheaters. But now that, there's people that just don't believe anything, but there's a segment that are coming out. So I admire them for doing that. I wish more people spoke up earlier, but
yeah,
talk about current times now, that's been on my mind a lot. So
2 more and we're out of here. This could be the last quote you'll hear from me. Thornton Wilder, 1928. Art is confession. Art is the secret told. But art is not only the desire to tell one's secret, it's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time. You've laid your cards on the table for over 90 minutes. I'm not insinuating you haven't already answered this. Mazzy, what's it really all about for you?
Nurturing and keeping the lifelong friendships in my life and sharing music with them.
Yeah. Dude, I am so on that page. I love that. Sharing music and nurturing is one of my favorite words. What gives you the most optimism?
The sun still keeps coming up every morning. Of course, in Seattle, you don't see it every morning, but it's out there.
It's really beautiful. I'll tell you, the first question is, what is the best thing for a human being? I got that. Wilhelm Reich said the best thing for a human being is another human being. The last question is, what gives you the most optimism, is what they asked Groucho Marx at the end of his life. And he said, other people. So it's sure been fun spending this time with another person. Mazzy, what a trip this has been for me. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. It was interesting. Very different than the usual ones. Thank you.
All right. I'm going to hit the end broadcast button, but I hope this never ends, dude. Thank you.